I've always preferred the feel of playing Neo Geo games on an arcade cabinet. Maybe it's just because that's how I played those games as a kid, but it's still my preference. That's not feasible for most people, so I was really intrigued when the Neo Geo Mini emulation console was announced, but that performed about the same as a typical emulation console. Luckily, I was able to come up with something even better that runs off real hardware and provides an accurate arcade experience. First, I gotta start out by saying in its original form, this CRT-based emulation machine was way worse than the official Neo Geo Mini. While it was an officially licensed product from SNK made back in 2003, it only had a few games, and it was based off an old emulation board that definitely has not aged well. First, the loading times reminded me of the Neo Geo CD. It took forever to start a game once you've selected it from the main menu. Next, the lag wasn't very impressive. I measured by counting how many frames were drawn. That's that beam of light going down the screen drawing each frame, from the time the LED lit when I pressed the button until there's movement on the screen. Overall, it averaged at least 3 frames of lag, meaning a Raspberry Pi probably has better emulation. And then there was the sound. Oh boy, was this thing terrible. I think this might be the worst Neo Geo sound emulation I've ever heard. Take a look for yourself. I still thought this mini arcade machine could provide an awesome Neo Geo arcade experience, so I set out to restore it using original motherboards, and I chose the MV1B motherboard. It's a side-loading cartridge board, which I thought would be a good fit for this machine. Also, it uses the JAMA standard as opposed to custom Neo Geo pinouts, so we should be able to install it without many wiring changes. I had a feeling I'd run into issues with the installation, so I called a friend who's a Neo Geo arcade expert to help. Once Jose took a look, we were able to identify a few issues. First, we realized that moving the main CRT control board to the side panel would make everything much easier to fit in. Next, we added a Pico PSU to power the board separately from the chassis power. We also removed a wire going to the button that the original emulation board used to return to the menu. Lastly, we added a coin button to the JAMA harness, as the emulation machine didn't have one. Everything worked, and while I'm sure some people might have been okay with it in this form, all we saw was room for improvement. First, the CRT image was blurry and off-centered, and we weren't able to tweak it at all, a clear sign that the main board needs the capacitors replaced. Next, the control panel is way too small for 2 full sticks. In my opinion, these are 2 major problems to prevent this from being a comfortable solution to play on. Also, there were some technical concerns as well. The Pico PSU made me nervous as their build quality can vary greatly. Also, the volume pot on the motherboard would now be buried deep inside the arcade machine, which would make things dangerous if you needed to change that while it was in operation. Lastly, the side-loading MV1B would require you to insert a game underneath the CRT's neckboard. I mean, any solution that has you changing cartridges right next to the neckboard of a CRT isn't exactly safe, but we felt we could do better, so we decided to scrap everything that we'd done and start from the beginning. First, I discharged the CRT, removed the chassis and neckboard, and created a full capacitor list, and then recapped everything. This should help both with the video quality and longevity, as I chose high quality caps that were all higher voltage and temperature rated than the originals. Next, we dumped the Pico PSU in place of an actual arcade power supply. The one I chose isn't the highest quality, but it's only powering the Neo Geo board, not the CRT as well. The smaller boards draw so little power that it won't be an issue at all. I also decided that using a top-loading MV1C motherboard is a slightly better solution for this arcade machine. You'll still need to get dangerously close to the neckboard to insert and remove cartridges, but at least you don't need to put your hands next to the chassis at all. Also, this board has both the UniBIOS installed, as well as the Neo BIOS Master VMC, which takes the place of a memory card. It'll automatically save as if there was always a memory card inserted in the machine. I wanted to address the audio as well, because I wanted to upgrade the terrible speaker that this thing came with, and I also wanted a way to adjust the volume externally. First, I swapped the speaker with a much higher quality one that fits right in its place. The difference in the two speakers is laughable. Look at how much more the new one weighs over the original. Next, I removed the volume pot on the MV1C and wired it to an externally mounted one. I held this in place with epoxy as I couldn't think of any better mounting solution, however it seems to be really solid. It's a bit sensitive at lower volumes, but works perfect overall. Lastly, I don't think the components in here will be too hot, but I added some exhaust fans just to be safe. I mounted them with a screw, then sealed the outsides with a tiny bit of hot glue just to create a seal and make sure they exhaust properly. Now that the machine's insides were properly refurbished, I turned my attention to the front. That control panel absolutely had to go. I sent Haruman's Customs the dimensions, and he made me a Neo Geo style control panel. I didn't stop there though. I also ordered new quality buttons and a stick. The one-player experience on this machine was now comfortable and competition quality. But what's the fun of an arcade machine if you can't enjoy it with your friends? Since two people can't fit comfortably using the built-in control panel, I used Tianfeng's new direct wire board and added controller inputs to the front of the machine. Now if I want to play a two-player game, either one person could use the control panel and the other can use an external controller, or we could both use external controllers and essentially just use the machine as a monitor. It'll work with all official Neo Geo controllers, including the Neo Geo CD gamepad, as well as any arcade stick that's been direct wired. Please check out the direct controller input mod video for more info. Rounding up this machine is a Neo SD ROM cart. While I always appreciate using original cartridges, I felt this is the perfect scenario for a ROM cart. I now have access to the entire library of games without ever needing to remove the back of the machine and put my hands near an exposed CRT. The only thing I wasn't able to fix was the height and width of the video. After the recap, I was able to stretch it enough to fill more of the screen, however the top is a bit cut off and there's still some unused space on the bottom. I tried swapping out the height adjustment potentiometer to solve this, but that didn't seem to do anything at all. I think to fully fix this, I'd need to change some of the other types of capacitors on board to a different value, but there isn't any information out there on this chassis. It's absolutely good enough, as Neo Geo games were all made with overscan in mind, but it still cuts the top off certain menus, and the tiny amount of unused space on the bottom still kind of bugs me. In fact, I held off on making this video because I was really trying to find any solution for it, but I'm just out of options. I think I would need to identify the exact capacitors that I would need to change on the motherboard, and then try to figure out which is the correct value to replace it with. So I posted on some arcade forums, which I will link to in the description, and if I am ever able to figure out the right way to set this chassis, I'll post info for people, so anybody with the same arcade chassis won't have to go through the same geometry issues. While there's plenty of excellent ways to experience Neo Geo games, this is my personal favorite. A personal arcade experience, so I have the same look and feel that I always did playing Neo Geo games in the arcade, but something that's small enough that I could pick up and carry around if I need to, not a giant arcade machine that I would need my friend's help moving it around like the Neo Geo machine I used to own. This MiniMVS now sounds great thanks to that new speaker, and the CRT itself is really clear. Both the recap and the fact that it had little to no hours of use on it means this machine will probably last me a long time. It's not as sharp as a high line count professional video monitor would be, but to me, this is just how Neo Geo should look, and how it always looked back in the arcades. I still have a few more ideas on how I might be able to add some cool features to it, but even if I never get around to those, I'm super happy with how it all turned out. That's it for this time. If you liked this video and some of the cool ideas like the direct input board that it inspired, please consider signing up for any of our support services such as Patreon or Floatplane, as your support is what makes projects like this happen. Also, check out the weekly podcast that keeps people in the loop of everything going on in the retro gaming scene, available every Wednesday as a video and wherever audio podcasts are found. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.